Hey folks, Rob Ager here with a little bit of thoughts on the James Bond series. Something I've heard time and time again over the years from various people is the notion that certain James Bond movies are realistic or more realistic. This one's more realistic than the other and blah 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 blah. Now frankly, it absolutely astounds me that anybody would consider any of the James Bond movies to be realistic, and I include the entire era right through from Sean Connery through to Daniel Craig. Every single James Bond movie I've seen has been absolutely ridiculous in terms of plot contrivances, in terms of the James Bond character and all the unrealism that goes with him, to the point where he's virtually a superhero, right through to the details of the action scenes and so on. I haven't seen a James Bond movie yet that is remotely realistic. Okay, so I'm going to go through a couple of Bond movies which are generally cited as being more sort of realistic. First of all, the Timothy Dalton films. Timothy Dalton as James Bond I really liked, but a lot of people say he was more dark and realistic, but I don't think he was. So I'm going to take you through some of the scenes of his first Bond movie, The Living Daylights, which as far as I'm concerned totally fits with the standard Bond formula that was already there with Connery, Lazenby and Moore. And the next movie I'm going to go into is going to be Casino Royale, because that was the next big change. Well, not that The Living Daylights was a big change, but Casino Royale was considered to be a huge change in the Bond formula, and it was, but it wasn't more realistic, and we're going to go into that shortly. Now, I'm not going to go through these scenes with a sort of ad-libbed narration, just going from memory. I've actually gone through the scenes in fine detail, shot by shot, and I've taken a lot of written notes, and I've written out a detailed narration of these action scenes to show you just how unbelievably unrealistic they are, keeping with the other Bond films. And so I'm going to record that as a separate narration and present this part of the video as a sort of standard film analysis like I do with my other videos. Then I'll come back at the end and offer you a few more thoughts to the camera. Alright, so here goes. Right, we'll start with Timothy Dalton's first Bond outing, The Living Daylights. Somehow a killer working for someone has managed to infiltrate all the security on the island just for the sake of killing a couple of agents during the training exercise, and that's about as fleshed out as the plot of the scene gets. Seems to be a suicide mission as well, because how the hell is this killer going to escape the island? And rather than trying to kill the third agent, Bond, who is unarmed, the killer opts for a masterstroke genius escape plan. Steal a jeep and just crash through all the security barriers until you get to the bottom of the island, where he can presumably steal a speedboat and somehow not get blown out of the water by ships or helicopters. Fortunately for the new dark and realistic James Bond, there's a small path leading to an ideal height for jumping onto the roof of a jeep, and the killer hasn't learned how to work a gear shift yet, so Bond has enough time to catch up. The professionally trained killer is a bad enough shot that he only manages to shoot between Bond's legs, and fortunately for Bond, the killer hasn't seen the Road Warrior. Top marks to the most reflexive gate guard I've ever seen in any movie. He shoots some boxes of fireworks and explosives, but they don't go off yet because the narrative requires that Bond survives the scene. This killer may be crap with a gun, but he's superb with a steering wheel in a knife defense scenario. Even the pink paint on the windscreen can't hinder his driving skills. A box falls out and explodes, conveniently not killing Bond, but letting us know that these boxes can and will explode soon. Nice parachute escape plan for Bond. Bad guy has a phobia of water, but the boxes of explosives spare him the torment of drowning. A luxury yacht occupied by nothing more than a hot babe on heat just happens to be circling the Rock of Gibraltar and right below where Bond is about to parachute into the ocean, and there's nobody else on this boat. Not only does dark and realistic Bond not drown, but he gets to slot his meat.
I'll report in an hour.
Won't you join me?
Better make that 2.
No dinner date foreplay required, none of the usual, hey, I just rescued you, so you now owe me your body. He just has to show up, and she offers herself. This movie is exactly the same pure fantasy formula as the Connery, Lazenby and Moore era, and it's not just the opening scene. Bond's car later on has a super powerful metal slicing laser. The other car is sliced right through and yet the brakes still work. And Bond has his usual silly one-liners to match.
What happened?
Salt corrosion.
His car then uses an entire wooden cabin as a shield. It has pop-out skis and missiles that can disintegrate the middle section of a truck just enough to drive through. Then he and his gal escape firing enemies by using a cello and its case as a sled with a rudder. This movie isn't even pretending to be realistic because it's all good family fun and entertainment like the traditional Bond movies always were, and it's great. Let's now move on to the Daniel Craig first Bond film, Casino Royale, another instance in which claims have been mistakenly made that the series has somehow become more dark and realistic. Well, we could say it's dark in that the opening scenes are shot in black and white, but what about the realism? The new super muscular Bond punches this guy right in the nose, but it hardly affects him. What use are the muscles if a direct punch in the face does fuck all? The guy's nose may be made of Kevlar, but the cubicle walls are more soft than plasterboard. An elbow to the guy's Kevlar nose and still hardly any effect, but somehow Bond thinks a toilet cubicle saloon door will somehow achieve what his knuckles and elbow couldn't. A kick in the face and virtually no effect. This guy is just a punch bag for the sake of showing Bond striking blows angrily. The guy somehow believes a plastic bin will make a good weapon, and somehow Bond perceives that plastic bin as a threat. Alright, so let's just stop a moment there, and I'm going to point out a pattern that is familiar to virtually all the action scenes in this movie. By making the action fast with shaky handheld camera, multiple instances of ridiculous unrealism bypass the viewer's common sense, but it's still unrealistic. Another face punch, and the rest of the guy's body seems to be made of Kevlar because a toilet cubicle shatters to pieces just from him falling onto it. Bond tries to drown this guy, and he's dumb enough to believe that you can drown a person in 13 seconds. But for argument's sake, let's just say he wanted the guy alive for questioning. Then why be dumb enough to leave a handgun within arm's reach of him? It only means Bond has to kill him anyway. By the way, a great joke to have in this scene would have been if one of the guys had his cock hanging out like he'd just been assaulted while having a piss. Or pants around the ankles could have been even funnier. Alright, now you might think I'm being nitpicky about the details of the scene, but those who claim the Dalton or Craig era Bond films are more dark and realistic typically do the same nitpicking of the old school Bond movies to try and support their point. And my argument is that this scene isn't more realistic at all, but rather that audiences are duped into thinking it's more realistic because Bond appears to look and fight more like a rabid pit bull and has an angry expression on his face all the time. But it doesn't wash for me. They did this in The Bourne Identity, and I found that film boring and unrealistic too. So changing the Bond formula into a mimicry that may as well be called the Bond Identity doesn't do it for me either. Think I'm being biased against the film? Well, let's take a look at the next big fight. Bond chasing a guy through a construction site in a scene that has more in common with Sonic the Hedgehog than physical reality. Before we do, I'll just say that I do like this action sequence. It's fun and exhilarating, it's very well shot, technically well done, there's some great stunts, aided by wires on the stuntmen by the way, but it's not realistic. If anything, this is even more unrealistic than a lot of action scenes in the old Bond movies. I also do actually like Daniel Craig. I think he's got a really good screen presence, but to me he isn't suited to the James Bond role. His cold, chiseled face and ripped physique make him akin to Charles Bronson in classic movies like Hard Times, but you wouldn't cast Bronson as James Bond, would you? And for me, Craig lacks the charm, sophistication and positive outlook of all the Bond incarnations that preceded him, and perhaps more important, he lacks the humour. Comedy has always been a crucial element of the Bond formula, and it fitted perfectly with the pantomime unrealism of the plots and action scenes. But I'll say it again, I like Craig as an actor, but I think his cold hard looks limit the roles he can play, and so I think he's miscast as Bond. But he's also at a disadvantage in the role because the stories in the new Bond films are generally very boring, and the hilarious sexual shenanigans of the old school Bond movies are now masked over to please politically correct idiots who are in denial of sexual motivation reality. So yes, that was a bit of a rant against the Craig era Bond films because I think they've utterly ruined the formula. Right, so back to the action scene. Like I said, the physicality of the scene plays out like a level of Sonic the Hedgehog. Characters can run up beams, perform death-defying leaps and rolls. The parkour performance from this guy is excellent, though aided by lots of camera trickery, because even he wouldn't be able to do a lot of these stunts. I have heard a lot of people complain that they don't like the Bond movie Octopussy because Bond has a silly Tarzan impression moment here. Obviously that 5 or so second moment was a joke for the kids because the Bond movies used to be a family fun experience, but the Tarzan comparison is also an appropriate analogy for this lengthy chase in Casino Royale. And it's arguably even more ridiculous. This guy can climb thin steel cables with his bare hands. That would tear the hell out of anyone's fingers. Neither of these guys slip when running on beams, even at an angle. If for some reason Bond doesn't have a gun on him, even though his inexperienced co-worker did have one, or if Bond does have a gun, then he's decided not to use it because he sees the opportunity to embrace his inner Tarzan. This should have been the end for Bond here, but divine intervention ensures that the other guy has run out of ammo and not realised. Bit cliched, isn't it? Hand-to-hand combat on the slippery bars of a crane. Yeah, right. Bond falls and grabs on, but the bad guy ignores an opportunity to stomp Bond's hands and send him to his death. Another conveniently placed crane now, and spring-heeled Jack is able to leap a long distance that would typically break someone's legs in the real world, or at least sprain their ankles. Beyond the cranes, a conveniently placed portion of the building that has horizontal surfaces is available for them to land on, and even bigger leg-breaking drops are made. But our protagonists have rubber bones, so they're fine. This isn't realistic, folks. This is Mirror's Edge, the movie. Hot on the spring heels of Jack, James Spider-Man Bond makes the same leap. Ooh, but he slips and grabs on, not breaking or fracturing any ribs in the process. Oh, and by the way, have I mentioned the motivational unrealism yet? As if either of these guys would actually have the guts to even try making these jumps. They'd be terrified. Bond lands and tumbles off a ledge, and realistically there's a soft metal crash mat to break his fall. Wet floors, but neither of these racers slip and fall. Springheel takes a random leap of faith here, and a video game platform just happens to be moving into position for him, and another platform is in position for Bond to keep up the chase. Guy makes it to a well-guarded embassy, but Bond is lucky that a slow enough moving video game platform allows him to leap straight over the wall and into there. There's dozens of guards with rifles in this place, but that isn't going to put James Bond off for a second. No planning needed, no backup, just jump over the wall and play it by ear. What could possibly go wrong? He just casually walks into a guarded building and starts fighting because he knows he has God, the scriptwriter, on his side. Parkour Guy had the guts to make death-defying leaps, but once you grab hold of him, he becomes a terrified ragdoll. 3 guys with rifles? Well, you just shoot a pipe next to them in a very precise position to ensure that steam blows in all 3 of their faces. Very realistic. Lots of guys firing rifles at Bond, but they all miss. Oh, except for shooting the ragdoll guy in the leg and ending his parkour career. Bond gets his captive outside and a dozen rifles are pointed at him, but none of them fire at him even though Bond is exposed from the waist up. How big an opening do they need? And realistic Bond isn't afraid in the slightest, with 12 rifles pointed at him. Even after he pushes this guy away, they don't bother shooting him. Bond pulls a gun from his belt, which apparently had been there throughout the entire parkour chase, but he never bothered using it, and it never fell out during all that leaping and rolling. And none of these 12 soldiers have the reflexes to pull the trigger before Bond shoots spring-heeled Jack and then shoots a gas canister. As always happens in action movies, gas bottles reliably explode instantly when they're shot by the hero, and the bullets never just bounce off or fail to penetrate. The explosion magically clears away all 12 of the riflemen, even the ones who were aiming from inside the windows. And as if that wasn't bonkers enough, the explosion blew open the gates to the premises from that distance, but somehow didn't manage to damage Bond himself. They just blew the doors open so that he could escape. Realistic James Bond, my arse. I've played more realistic video games. It's a decent action sequence, a bit dragged out for my tastes, but the unrealism is off the scale here. Like I said earlier, making a fight seem fast-paced, often tricks people into not logically noticing the ridiculousness of it all. The same goes for harsh lighting, subdued colours, and grimy environments. These are all just gimmicks to dupe the audience into thinking that what they're watching is more realistic. And the same goes for greased muscles and thuggish looking expressions. If those things equated to realism, then Rambo Part 2 would be held in even higher critical esteem than Apocalypse Now. Okay, so that's my detailed breakdown of some of the opening action scenes from The Living Daylights and from Casino Royale. Two movies that are often cited as being more realistic James Bond movies, but I can't fucking see it. These movies, all of them, are utter fantasy, and I'm glad that they're total fantasy because, that's the appeal of the Bond movies. We don't watch Bond movies in order to have something realistic. It's a fantasy, and we enjoy it on that level. And, if you go through the Casino Royale film, there's other elements where they've changed the formula in ways that I personally disapprove of and don't like. For example, the Bond movies have generally always been a family experience. They're the type of movies that you could take your 5-6-year-old kid to watch on the cinema and they would love it. I saw some of the Bond movies on the cinema when I was that age and I was just enthralled, absolutely thrilled. But with Casino Royale, which is the supposed new improved version of James Bond, more realistic, but it's not more realistic as I've shown you in detail. With that movie, they abandoned the kid audiences almost completely. They've got Bond being sexually tortured. Never mind just having a torture scene, which you typically didn't have in Bond movies before. It's a sexual torture scene, and it's all done in a sort of dark dungeon basement type grimy room to make it more like a horror movie. And that's not the type of thing I would want to take my kid to watch on the cinema. So as far as I'm concerned, the Bond movies have now abandoned kids in the audience, and that's a big, big change, and it's one that I highly disapprove of. Also, the plots in the Bond films have been lame for quite a long time. They've been lame throughout the Craig era. Casino Royale is it's got a lot of good qualities, but its story is fucking boring. And from midway through the movie, the story just turns to shit. And it's like, Bond falls in love with this girl who he barely fucking knows. The guy's supposed to be intelligent. You don't just fall in love with someone willy-nilly who you barely fucking know. You have a bit of a relationship first, and then you decide, this is the woman for me. So that didn't work for me. And the plot in the last half of the movie was boring as hell. And frankly, the plot in the first half of the movie was boring as hell. Because something about terrorism funding, oh wow, how original. The plot in the new Bond movies doesn't do it for me. They try to give Bond some sort of dark and moody history so that they can have the excuse to have him as a miserable bastard throughout the movies. And like I've said, I like Daniel Craig as an actor. I think he's great for certain types of roles, but I think he's severely miscast as James Bond. He's got no sense of humour. Maybe he could have a sense of humour if it was written into the roles, but they've written the new Bond movies to be extremely miserable and what I call fashionable anger, where he just wants to slam people's heads in and stuff like a thug. For me, they've completely lost the formula, and they've ruined it by trying to imitate the Bourne movies, which I don't like anyway. I saw the first one and I found it really boring and lame, and I found the plot boring. And the action scenes just felt generic to me in that. And I think the Casino Royale action scenes are better than the ones in the Bourne movie that I saw, the first one. But still, some dynamic action scenes isn't enough. You need a good plot as well. And I don't really care about the Bond character anymore because he's such a miserable bastard. Because miserable bastards in real life and people who are angry all the time, I don't really like them. And I don't trust angry people. They tend to be backstabbing types, angry people, and they tend to be the types who react and do things horrible to other people out of their emotions rather than actually thinking about what they're doing. So yeah, the new Bond, he doesn't appeal to me in his character or the style of the movies. I guess they're worth watching once, but Quantum of Solace I just thought was absolutely the lamest Bond movie I've ever seen, and the action scenes were just over-edited to death, and that just spoiled that one for me. Skyfall, a lot of people raved on that, or at least the paid critics did. And but I watched that one and I was pretty fucking bored. And it had all the standard plot contrivances, like the bad guy. Somehow he managed to have all these moles in MI5, these infiltrators. Do you realize how fucking difficult it would be to get a load of infiltrators into a place like MI5 or MI6? It's just like that. Those are the types of places that would check your background, look at your history in detail, your family, your friends, your psychological habits, your work history. They would fucking check your history out to death before they let you into their offices. And even then, you'd have to move right up the ranks in order to find shit out. So, but they just had that in Skyfall, that this villain just had the ability to just get infiltrators into all these places. And they had the same problem in The Dark Knight as well. The Joker was able to take mentally ill people and put them into positions where they were able to get access to court judges and pretend to be cops and all kinds of crap like that. So those kind of plot elements don't work for me either. Now, I think something that's going on with this whole Bond formula thing is part of a bit of a larger trend where people tend to be ashamed of their fantasies, and when it comes to movies, the old types of movies where you had like Rambo and Commando and all those dumb 80s action movies, people loved that stuff, and we all knew it was bullshit. We all knew it was totally unrealistic, pure fantasy, and we could watch those movies and enjoy them and laugh at them at the same time. I mean, half the time you couldn't tell when these movies were being comedy or not. You couldn't tell if they were taking themselves seriously or not. But there were definitely moments in a lot of those old classic action movies where there was a little wink to the camera, a little joke from the protagonist, just something to just nudge the audience and say, yeah, we know this is a load of fucking bullshit, this is just stupidity, it's fantasy, but hey, we know that you know, and that's cool, and just enjoy it, and we're not trying to insult your intelligence. And that was something they really had going for them in the James Bond movies. They always used humour to offset the unrealism of the action and the plots. They'd have silly contrivances. They'd have women who just fall in love with Bond on the spot just because he walks in the fucking room. And it's like, this stuff is stupid, but you could laugh at it, and the movies deliberately made it funny so that you were in on the joke. And to me, that was quite a respectful, intelligent way of approaching the audience. But I don't like this approach where you've got all the ridiculous fantasy in the new Bond movies, but they try to pull the wool over your eyes by pretending that it's more dark and realistic when it's not. Now, I suppose an argument could be made, one that I would disagree with, but an argument could be made that the jokey, silly, what they call cheesy elements in the old James Bond movies drew away from any intelligent or serious elements in the plots of those films. But I disagree with that. It's entirely possible for a movie to be dumb family entertainment on the one hand, but also to have hidden, intelligent, thoughtful stuff on the other hand. And a lot of the old Bond movies did have that kind of thing. In fact, I would say that some of the more deeper, not necessarily deeper, but some of the more sort of social and political themes that were present in the old Bond movies from time to time, I would say those themes were more well thought out and more interesting than the themes we get in the new Bond movies. I mean, terrorism funding, yawn fucking yawn. We've been hearing about terrorism since fucking 9/11 and we're all sick of it, and we all got bored of that years ago. Fuck off with your war on terror bullshit. We know it's just an excuse to fucking take over the Middle East and all that kind of stuff. We know about all that, and no one's interested in that anymore. But with the old Bond movies, every now and then you got these social or political issues that came up. For example, Goldfinger, I think that was only like the third or fourth Bond movie that was made, Sean Connery. And with that one, they had all the stuff about gold, the gold standard. You got scenes in the movie at the beginning where you got some banker guy who's talking about the relationship between gold and artificial or fiat currencies, money that's created by banks, and how the price of gold reflects the true value of the currency. Very rare that you get that kind of thing in a movie, but they had it in Goldfinger. That was awesome. And then you went on to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the only George Lazenby film, which I quite like. It's got some bad special effects in there, but it's got a really interesting plot. And one of the things that gets brought up in that, and this should be something that people should be interested in watching these days, is that the villain in the film has created a sort of laboratory on top of an icy mountain with all these scientists, and they've created a virus that they're planning on spreading to the world, which can make people and animals infertile and basically cause a lot of life on Earth to die out. That's a really interesting story, isn't it? And especially today, with all of the conspiracy theories about COVID and stuff like that, on Her Majesty's Secret Service, the plot of that film is a very interesting one to go and look at. And by the way, I'm not saying that the COVID was deliberately put out there as some sort of bioweapon. It's possible, but James Bond movies often brought up these kinds of things for the audience to consider. And then after, if going several movies later after On Her Majesty's Secret Service, you had, say, for example, the Roger Moore Bond movie, Octopussy. That movie has got a really good Cold War plot, quite a plausible scenario where a rogue Soviet Union general, I think he was a general or a colonel, I can't remember which, has decided amongst him and his friends that he wants to smuggle a nuclear bomb into a US base in Germany and set the thing off and make it look like an accident, so that all the population of Europe and America will demand nuclear disarmament, and then the Russians, or the Soviets I should say, could then charge in and be able to take over Europe without there being a significant nuclear weapon defence capability in place. That was a really interesting plot scenario that was in Octopussy. But loads of people are sort of like, oh, Octopussy, that was silly because it had James Bond pretending to be Tarzan, or it had a comedy fight scene where they were hitting each other with tennis rackets. And they'll just bring up something stupid like, oh, James Bond wore a clown outfit at one point in the movie, and that's beneath Bond. But Bond is supposed to be cool as hell, and what are they doing putting him in a clown outfit? So on account of that, they overlook this pretty good Cold War plot that they had in that movie. And then a further example going later on, the movie that we already explored in this video, The Living Daylights, that had a lot of stuff in it about Western arms dealers, private arms dealers, basically selling or giving weapons to foreign regimes who are arguably the enemy of us in the West. And that's something that does really happen in real life. There's a whole history of that if you go looking into it. So the Living Daylights movie brought that up, and it also brought up the drug dealing aspects involved in that as well. So there you go. I mean, you got all these old Bond movies which have got all the stupidity and the fun and the gadgets and the jokes and the ridiculousness that we've all come to expect from Bond, at least up until the Craig era. And yet those movies still had really good things going on. But in the new movies, I'm not finding much of interest in the plots. And I'm not just talking about the Craig era Bond films there. I think the Bond movies stopped being interesting probably in the late 80s, early 90s. I found that a lot of the Pierce Brosnan films didn't really have worthwhile plots that were engaging. I think The Living Daylights was probably the last James Bond film that I saw that actually had a story that I liked. Alright, so there you go. That's my little rant over with. The James Bond movies have always been unrealistic. The unrealism is actually a positive thing about these movies. Movies don't have to be realistic in order to be artistically worthwhile. In fact, you can be a lot more artistically creative with unrealism. I mean, you could even think of the James Bond movies as being like dream sequences, action fantasy dreams that tap into people's fantasies of ego and sexual promiscuity and all that kind of thing, being able to defeat your enemies with total ease as if you're a god. Bond movies tap into all that, and I think the Bond movies say as much about the audience as they do about anything else, because the fact that we human beings, we are into watching these James Bond movies even though they're totally silly, that says something about who we are and what we want deep down. Okay, so that's it. You've been listening to Rob Ager. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I'll speak to you guys soon. If you want to see more film analysis, head over to my website, collativelearning.com. Tons of stuff on there. In fact, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I put out one of my paywall videos, which was a study of all the title sequences of every single James Bond movie that's been put out so far. And it's a study of the sexuality, the erotic, pornographic elements in those title sequences, because that's a very interesting subject in itself. So that video is available on my site. Tons of other material on there. You can follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Those links are in the video description below. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. And yeah, more content coming soon. Thanks for watching. Take it easy and bye-bye.